Welcome to the Mindset Game podcast. I'm your host, Vered Kogan, and I'm absolutely delighted to introduce you to a very special guest today, Mikki Williams. Mikki Williams is a CSP, which stands for Certified Speaking Professional, a member of the very prestigious Speaker Hall of Fame, and a TEDx speaker. And if you have not had a chance to hear her TEDx talk yet, I highly encourage you to do so. Mikki is a global celebrity speaker and transformational storyteller. In fact, she was chosen as one of the best speakers in the country by Meetings and Convention magazine, along with Tony Robbins, Bill Gates, and Lou Holtz. Mikki is an award-winning Vistage speaker, the world's leading executive organization, and she is a master chair of two of their peer advisory boards. And if that's not enough, this incredible busy entrepreneur runs speaker schools, the Mickey Mouth Club, Keynote Camp, outrageous orators, and she was recognized in Forbes as a top executive speech coach. She has spoken in every state, every Canadian province, and every continent except Antarctica, where she can't wear her stilettos. Welcome, Mikki. Thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you, Vered. I'm delighted to be with you today. Thank you for the invitation.
And on a personal note, Mikki, I've heard about you from some of your Vistage group members, and they speak so highly of you. And I've heard of you from other Vistage shares about how giving you are, and I'm really excited that you're here to share with our listeners a little bit of your story and some of what you've learned in your experiences over the years that could really help them create an outrageous, incredible life as you have for yourself.
You've created a wonderful venue for this to help people. I congratulate you, Vered, for your foresight and your innovativeness to create this to help people with, and I love your title, The Mindset Game. It's fabulous.
Thank you, Mikki. So, would you be willing to kind of start us off with sharing a little bit of that story? How did you get to this incredible place, living this amazing life?
Well, that it is, and I'm very humbled and grateful by it all. Didn't start out that way. I was raised by a single parent and no brothers and sisters. I always dreamed of having a large family, the house with the white picket fence in the country and that whole bit. And went away to college and married my college sweetheart. And as they say, when we make plans, God laughs. Unfortunately, he was killed in a car accident when we were both 29, and I had a 2-year-old child and another one on the way, which I lost. We had 3 months of tragedy. My second child, his father died, and then he died, with all in a 3-month period. They say things happen in threes. And I was totally unprepared for that. You can imagine at 29, no money, no job, and on my way to being that housewife and mother I always dreamed of being. And after I got through part of that tragedy and I had to make a living for myself and my son Jason, I relied on my natural skill set. I was a former professional dancer. So I don't know how many of your listeners remember boom boxes, but I take a boom box and I go to the local Knights of Columbus Hall and I teach dance. And then I was a really good cook and I started a catering business. And before you know it, I had no MBA, I had no business. I graduated college with a physical education degree and a minor in dance, no clue about business. And all of a sudden, things started to really expand. And from there, I found out I'm an entrepreneur at heart and very good at it. And from that period to now, there's been about 9 different entrepreneurial businesses, everything from C Corp, S Corp, partnership, sole prop, you name it, I've done it. Which really led to the culmination of becoming a Vistage chair and a speaker, because now I get to speak about all those life stories and business stories that I've had. My narrative, so to speak, has really been a platform for the careers at this stage of life. That is probably the shortest I've ever told that story, Vered. Wow.
Well, it was short and sweet because I think we got the essence of it, which is that unexpected things happen in our life, and we get to choose to pick ourselves back up, decide how we want to live, sometimes by need because we've got a little kiddo at home that needs us, and sometimes by choice. Either way, we're driven to create. And the question is, how do we do that? Because for you to have gone from where you were to what you created, my hallucination is that something inside of you was ignited, that you created for yourself a certain mindset, perhaps, that allowed you to stay the course, to create. What do you think that was?
It's an interesting question, Vered. I want to go back to something you said because it was a very profound moment for me in my life. At some point, somebody asked me, I've been interviewed a lot about my life and it's been in, media publications. And I said one day in an interview, I said, I didn't have a choice. I had a 2-year-old kid, and somebody looked at me and said, you absolutely did have a choice. You could have gone on welfare. You could have had a lifelong pity party. You could have been in therapy your whole life to do it. And until that moment, I never realized the power of choice. And now I'm like the poster child for choice. When everybody, the empathy meter balances out with me wanting to say, you do have a choice. And I realized all the choices I've made along the way, good or bad ones, have always been mine. That's self-accountability per se. When you ask about the mindset, I have to go back to being raised by a single mom who was a single working mom before women even did that. And I look back on that childhood, again, without brothers or sisters or a dad, so to speak. She really instilled in me a kind of you can do anything kind of attitude. I walked on water for her, and I guess she put that in my head. So I'm kind of fearless when it comes to that. And I think the other thing, the mindset, I don't know how far it goes back, there's part of it there. When you're faced with a tragedy that I was at that point in my life, that phrase, what are you afraid of and what do you got to lose, becomes just a moot point when you've already lost that. And I guess in some ways, my mindset is one of, I embrace change, which most people fear. I'm not afraid to try things. I'm not afraid of failure or success. And I think it's a combination of my upbringing and that life-changing moment, that defining moment of my life, if you call it.
And I honor you for kind of sharing with us that it really is a choice. We do have a choice, and it's moment by moment by moment by moment that we get to choose.
Yeah.
And what would you say to those individuals that may not have had instilled in them this, I can do anything mindset, this self-belief, this fearlessness, if you will? How can they get that?
I am an avid reader, and my son would probably roll his eyes that I'm even going to share this, of self-help books. I just garbage in, garbage out. What you put in your head and you manifest. I just believe that. I've always had a very positive attitude. I've embraced life and people, probably again because of that defining moment more than other people. And I think always reading, positive psychology and books about affirming life's good and trying to focus on all that has just been, to your point, a mindset. And I think you could develop it at any time in life. I've seen people with circumstances in their life that are just horrific, that turn into the most positive people in the world, and the reverse. And I know you've seen that as well. And again, it goes back to choice, owning your choices, good and bad ones.
And I love that you're sharing that, because I agree with you that whatever you condition yourself, whether it's through books or listening to podcasts like this, or attending events like the presentations that you offer, right? It helps us to connect with possibilities, because when we read about or hear about people like you who've experienced the unimaginable, and having been able to rise from that and create even more good and love in our world as a result of that, it is very inspiring. And I believe that it helps us to know it's possible for ourselves as well. And sometimes that's all it takes, just a little glimmer of belief that it is possible, and then our mind can start to create those stories, those images of what might be possible for us. So, can you share a little bit more about the power of those stories, the inner stories, if you will, that we tell ourselves?
We all have a story. We all have an origin story, and we all get stories every day. I always find it interesting. I run speaker schools, and on day one, people come together and we share why they're here and who they are and why they're from and where they're from. And when people say, I came because I have no stories, I have to laugh. I said, of course you have. The day you were born was a story. I think people just don't recognize that we live in story. Our lives are a culmination of story, 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 from that very first origin story all the way through our very last story. It's our own narrative. Now, some people make up their story and hold on to it, and it's not a true story. And that becomes an excuse or a rationale. Part of the reason that I started to just focus on story, my 35 years as a professional speaker, I had a lot of different places there I put my energy. And when I hit upon story, I realized I was a natural storyteller because that's the way everybody always remembered me. I didn't take a course at the time. I just built my career on it, authentic stories. I started to research it. And even when positive psychology came out, I became fascinated. Up to that point, I was reading what you'd call self-help books. And now there was a real science behind it. You can rewire your brain. And then I started reading about stories, even though I was what you call a natural storyteller. I wanted to find the science behind story and how the brain works, why it lights up when we tell stories, and what happens with the neurons when they fire. It became more than just a story that we all have. It became like a fascination to how it's so powerful and how we let it go for so long. And if you go back to the caveman days, that's what they did. They were writing stories and hieroglyphics on the wall. In some way, someone came along and divided our brain into left brain and right and said, no, you're an analytical person. Don't tell stories. Right? I get very passionate about it. You could tell.
Well, I share in that passion because I believe that our inner narratives create the things in our life, in our world, that we perceive to be true. Because what we expect to see based on the stories that we've told ourselves enough times, and as you said, often which are not even true if they're not serving us well,
Right.
it is those stories that then really limit our ability to perceive anything that's not aligned with that. And so we can really just limit the possibilities that are available to us. And we do get to choose how we think and what it is that we create in our own narratives, as you said, to reprogram no matter how long we've told ourselves something. And, what's interesting is when you shared how people come to your speaker school, and on the first day, some of them say, I have no story. That kind of sparked a little something inside of me because I thought, my own story is not as grand, if you will, as other people's. I, had a good upbringing, very loving parents. Of course, like everybody else, I've had situations that led me to feel not good enough or not worthy enough. I believe that's pretty universal. So, what about those individuals that they're like, well, I thankfully haven't had tragedies, or I haven't, been abused, or God knows what. Um, what do I have to give the world?
It's another good question. It's something that's fresh in my mind. I moved to Florida a year ago, and I live in a beautiful community on a street with a really crazy name, Montelanico Loop. I have to spell that for the rest of my life. And because of COVID and because of the new community, I didn't really know a lot of people. And as is my nature, anyone who knows me would not find this surprising. I started Mickey's Monday Montelanico Mingler. And I invited all the women. I went with a flyer like the Pied Paper and put it in everyone's doorway, about 100 homes, because the loop is even bigger than that. And I started this thing in my driveway. And because I've been a Vistage chair, I've always used inclusion exercises to start my group off. Funny ones, poignant ones, etc. Well, here I am doing the same thing with these women, some of them who've never been in the workforce and never been exposed to this. And just last night, I went out and I got 50 pennies and I gave everybody a penny. And I said, look at the year of the penny, and we're each going to share a story about something happened to us in that year. Now, it was so fulfilling for me to listen to these women who'd never done an exercise like this and the stories that came out. I mean, one woman had majored in poultry science. Who knew that was a sign? And we got a great story. And then two women actually found out that both their kids go to the same school. There's only 15 kids in the country that have this particular program. It's both their kids. They're both coming here for the holidays. And I mean, there were so many things that came out of all those little mini stories. I loved it.
That's cool. That's really cool. Thank you for sharing that. And on top of the fact that it reminds myself and I imagine others out there that we do have a story to share. And it's the meaning that we give to whatever happens that, is really the energy of the story. But in addition to that, you once again demonstrated for us choice. We can choose to be a victim, right? Poor me, I don't know anybody in this loop, right? In this new neighborhood. Yes. Or I get to choose to create something really special for myself and others, and I'm going to take the action to make it happen.
Right. Exactly. And again, it goes back to choice. It goes back to fear. It goes back to confidence. It goes back to so many different things that are all part of our own story. The fears we have come from our own narratives and the stories we've told ourselves. It's a very interesting web. And the more I coach people on how to tell their story, or the more when they come to speaker school and people stand up and tell their story, it's interesting. My fiance is writing a book right now, and he's a tennis pro. And he's writing all these stories from his career. And he was going to put all this tennis instruction at the back end. I said, no, you don't want to do that. He said, why not? I said, because then it'll just be in the sports section of the bookstore, and you've got all these inspirational stories. He said, yeah, but they're all related to tennis. I said, that doesn't matter. There's a message in every story. No one can tell me a story that I can't find a message 2 or 3 in. And he's like oblivious to that. Again, that whole mindset, right? I don't have stories. You just spewed out all these fabulous stories. The fact that they have to do with tennis, there's life lessons in tennis, like there's life lessons in knitting. There's life lessons in everything we do every day. We are walking stories.
Thank you. And what's really cool about this idea of stories, or our own transformational stories, is not only what happens when we express them, yes, in writing, like your fiance, or through speech, or by sharing them with our neighbor or our children or others, in terms of inspiring others, helping people to see some of their own strengths, or maybe what's possible for them. But in addition to that, I think what's really cool is the gift for ourselves, because when we can remember our own stories, what we overcame, which oftentimes we forget. Yes, we focus more on what we didn't do than what we did do, and when we can really remember our own life's lessons and allow them to guide us moving forward, that can be really empowering.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's a key phrase, life's lessons. There's no bad experiences or good experience. They're all lessons. If you use them as a springboard somehow in your life, or something that will enhance your life or move the needle forward, something, because again, that's another mindset, another perspective.
So would you be willing to share some tips or tools, anything at all that could help us to remember, really reconnect with our own transformational stories, our own life's lessons, for those of us who may have forgotten?
Yeah, a couple of things that I share with, my students or my coaching clients all the time. I say, start a story file. What does that look like? On a daily basis, you and I could be talking, Vera, and for example, the story about the women last night with the penny came out. I didn't plan to tell that story. I say to people, every day, someone says something to you that triggers a story in your memory bank. I said, name the story. I call it keyword the story, and then drop it into your story file. And get in this habit of collecting daily the stories that you tell, or perhaps the stories that someone told you, or perhaps something you read in a book, or something that comes online. I've gotten some incredible stories through Facebook this last month, heartwarming, unbelievable stories that I've shared in the spirit of sharing, again, as good examples of stories. Oh, getting in the habit. Now, people who journal, that helps some people. Not everybody wants to do that. Some people like they're more audio and they'll make recordings of their stories as part of their life experience. There are companies now that compile those. For me, it's just getting people in the habit of collecting a story file. And especially at some point, you're going to need it. You'll give a speech or a roast or a toast, and you'll think, I have no material. And then you go back and you have all these fabulous stories that have messages. That's my best tip.
Oh, I love it because it helps us to be more conscious, more awake to tuning in to little hints, little guidance that can remind us to, look inward, remember our own strengths, our own experiences, and use that as a springboard for momentum moving forward. And I
Yeah.
think the more, we focus on something, the more we're going to see more of it, right? So once we start to capture that, as you said, to journal that or to keep that list, the more likely we are to notice in the moment stories and to acknowledge ourselves. And if we're in the midst of a story where we're in the mud, right, still not in the, learning part of it, but we're knee deep in the not so great part of it, to be hopeful that this is a story in the becoming, and that there will be a lesson or there will be a jewel, a gift, a gem at the end of it for us. And when we can focus on that, we can be more conscious of looking for that lesson as we're in it, which will typically lessen the pain and kind of allow us to create even more quickly and easily. Yeah.
Yeah, I can't tell you how many times last night with the women and the penny that someone would finish a story and somebody else would say, wow, what a great story. I think we have to listen for that reaction because we think, oh, that's just my own story. It's no big deal. And someone else listening to it. And, to quote myself, which I love to do, we listen to people's stories through the lens of our own experience. And that's one of the main reasons we get so engrossed in other people's stories, because we listen through the lens of our own experience. And that's how we attach to it.
And what role do these mental images that we create, these pictures in our mind, have when it comes to our stories?
They're there, and they just the brain is an incredible way it functions, and how it comes out is it's like when we need them, we're either reminded of them or we actually express them, or something happens where the stories of our life become a foundation for a new relationship or a new opportunity, things we wouldn't have realized before. And it's just, as I said, I've started studying brain, neuropsychology and neuroscience and cultural anthropology and behavioral psychology, just wanting to know more about why stories are so powerful now, and to use them in business. It's interesting when I'm coaching the executives, they're always thinking of their business stories. And I'm trying to say, no, your personal stories in a business setting are even more powerful. And all of a sudden they don't get that connection because they've never thought of that. And that goes back to a Brene Brown, the power of vulnerability, the willing to be vulnerable, to be authentic, to share something that makes a connection with other humans through the power of story. And sometimes people just need reminders, but that's okay because that's what keeps me in business.
I love it. And, it's when you were sharing the kind of idea of keeping track of the stories. And there were years where I used to do more career coaching and like interview coaching.
Yeah.
And what we would advise people, as you probably know, right, is to keep track of their accomplishment stories.
Sure.
And their learning stories and their failure stories, yes, because in every failure there is a gift, again, and a learning that could support us moving forward. And so I remember the acronym that we used is SOAR, SOAR, to help people. It's like S was the situation or task, like what happened, right? O is the obstacle, A is the action that you took and, or the team, or let's say company took. And then of course the result, and the result could just be a learning, right? Even if things didn't work out the way that we wanted.
Yeah, it's what I call human experience. And we have an exercise in speaker school to help people foster their story file. I say, all right, every one of you, biggest regret, Funniest thing that ever happened, most embarrassing, most memorable, biggest honor. I mean, there are tons of them. And we all have them because it's part of the human experience. And they're all stories. And that helps people get their story flow going. And all of a sudden they start to recognize the things that they weren't recognizing as stories. Or they'll say, oh, well, that's not important. Or why should I tell that? Or that's stupid and everything. No, no, no. Share it. It'll have meaning for somebody else because it probably has meaning for you that you may not even be aware of.
Yeah, that's cool, Mikki. And I've seen that sometimes, as you said, we never know how bits of our story resonate with others, even though to us it might seem like no big deal, but it might just be exactly what someone needed to hear at that moment. And I'm curious if you'd be willing now to look at kind of this concept of stories through the lens of intention. So the stories that we create for ourselves with regards to our future, what we truly deeply want. How important is it to create those stories of the future and to be very intentional about manifesting those, if you will?
I'd ventured to guess, Vera, that you have asked this same question in a coaching scenario as I have. Somebody tells you their story and you say, how is that serving you? Yes? Or how has that served you? There are so many people, in my coaching practice that will tell me a story, good, bad, or otherwise. I'm not standing in judgment, but I'm thinking if you're holding on to that, it's serving you in some way. It's keeping you from what you fear, it's keeping you from the success, the failure, the relationship, any of those things. It's like physician, heal thyself. All the years that I've been coaching and the things that I've seen and things that I've heard has been, to me, I'm a work in progress always. And when I get that aha in the coaching practice with someone else, it's the physician, heal thyself. Does that sound familiar? Why did you embrace that? Maybe you've been doing that a little too much. And when you talk about the story and the future, I think a lot of that has to do with letting go of those stories that do not serve us, stories that hold us back from what we really want in life. Again, being it success, money, relationship, that doesn't matter. That's the pot of gold at the end of the rainbow. And it's always, the cliche of the journey, not the destination. And that's all part of it. How do we use our story as a vehicle for letting go of the past ones that don't serve us, living in the present ones, and using those to inspire us for the future?
So I imagine some of the people listening are saying, yes, Mikki, I'm 100% with you. Now tell me, how do I do that? I want to let go of the past stories. I really want to be in the present and I want to create more intentionally. What do I do?
For me, it's accountability. To who? That becomes your choice. Accountability to be in a Vistage group, or accountability to hiring a coach, or accountability to a best friend or a partner. Without the accountability, there is no chance of success. That's why all these CEOs join Vistage, because it's lonely at the top and no one's telling them what to do or holding them accountable to doing it. I mean, in my journey as a Vistage chair, if I've learned that once, I've learned it 10,000 times, that even people at the top of their profession need to be accountable to someone to drive growth, because that's the only way, in my experience, you see growth. Someone's holding you accountable to what you promised. A perfect example would be my one woman show, which I launched, which I did 3 years ago. And I talked about it for years and years and years. And all of a sudden I sat with a group of 4 of the most highly respected Vistage chairs I could imagine at an event called Keepers of the Flame. And all of a sudden I realized this came up in a conversation. Well, I better do this because I'm accountable to these 4 chairs. Someone in your life is that person for you. What are you not doing, and who's going to hold you accountable? And pick the person who will, not the person who'll just pat you on the head.
I agree with you 100%. And we have research, as you know, to validate that
Yep.
success rates go up massively when we have accountability, especially for the first few weeks when there's
Yes.
some inner resistance to that. And it's just so much easier to just go back to the old behaviors.
Yeah.
What about for those individuals that don't yet know what their ideal story is? Like they don't know what they want. How do they access that? I know it's kind of a big question, but
It is a big question, and for me, it's a simple answer. Then you need a coach. You need a coach. You need a coach like you, or a coach like me, or a coach of somebody else. And that's why coaching has been such an explosive occupation. We know now why sports teams have coaches all these years. And finally, people are going, oh, a weight loss coach, oh, a business coach, oh, a story coach. For me, that's the answer for me all along in all my careers. Who's done it? Who's been there and done it? And I want to access that, whether it's a friend or a coach or a mentor or someone I hire or is willing to do it. But there are those people in our lives or in our inner circle or externally that we need to find that can help us bring out our story. I just truly believe that.
Yeah, it's very helpful to have that mirror. Yes, somebody reflecting back the things we say that we might not even be conscious of, or just reminding us,
Yes.
believing in us, and really helping us to reconnect with who we are, because we tend to get so busy, with stuff and forget our beautiful essence. And so, Mikki, you've had so far, and I say so far because you've got much of your life ahead of you and a lot of living with a lot of joy. And as you reflect back now for a moment, what are some of the juiciest, most heartwarming moments, those stories, if you will, that really stand out?
Well, there's one that will always stand out forever and ever is probably the ultimate. I don't know how to top it, although this month with my Vistage honoring, I don't know. This has been a lot of stories this month. But when I joined the National Speakers Association, I like to say, Verit, I was Dolly Parton on steroids. The hair was this big, the jewelry was flashier. I mean, and nobody befriended me. Everybody kind of looked at me like, yeah, come on, seriously? But I've had that my whole life because I've always been very flamboyant and outrageous, and I'm so used to it. And again, it's an inner confidence. Thank you, Mom. But when I arrived, really no one befriended me except the assistant to a very famous football referee named Jim Tunney. And his assistant's name was Nancy Hirsch. And she was the only one who befriended me for about 2 years, the only one who would speak to me, who believed in me, who encouraged me, and so forth. And I went through my whole career in this association. Oh, eventually, some people warmed up and realized I wasn't going anywhere, I was building a good career. They started paying attention, let go of their judgment and all those other things. And I was inducted into the Speaker Hall of Fame. Only 1% of all speakers get that. And when I got that phone call almost 20 years later, the first person I thought of was Nancy Hirsch. Now, I hadn't spoken to her in over 20 years. I had no idea where she was, alive, healthy, nothing. And I did my research thanks to the internet, and I found Nancy, 82 years of age, living in Santa Barbara, California. And I called her up. I said, Nancy, I don't know if you remember me. My name is Mikki Williams. And, oh, Mikki, of course. I followed your career and it's been wonderful. I said, well, Nancy, I'm being inducted into the Speaker Hall of Fame in Philadelphia. And I would love you to be there as my guest. I will fly you in from California and be my guest for the whole weekend. And she said, well, I have to get back to you because my family, I've never flown at this age. And long story short, she did come and she was in that audience and nobody knew she was there. And I still get misty talking about it. When I gave my acceptance speech, which was only 7 minutes long, I told that story in a very short version. And I said, and here tonight to celebrate me is Nancy Hirsch. And she stood up, this adorable little 82-year-old with flowers in her hair and a sparkly purple dress, and waved at the crowd. And it's a story and a moment in my life that I'll just never forget.
Thank you for sharing that. I actually had the privilege of watching that on video. It's on YouTube.
The induction ceremony.
And having her stand up at the table and I think for everybody listening to this story that you chose to share with us right now, there are so many nuggets. Yes, there are moments where we don't feel like we belong. We feel like we're different. Some of us are more confident on the inside than others, but we still feel like there's a judgment. And yet we find, we seek, and we hold on to that person in our life or people in our life that can see what's possible for us and that believe in us. And sometimes that's a parent, sometimes that's a friend, sometimes it's a coach.
But again, that's a story everybody has. I could ask you, Vered, who believed in you? Who inspired you? Who lifted you up when you were down? That's a human experience story. Until somebody asks, you don't think of the story. And all of a sudden you ask that question and then people go, oh yeah, I remember who, or I remember where, I remember when. I mean, that's the power and the beauty of story. Uncovering this whole thing that we all have that many of us are not even aware of how powerful our stories are.
And thank you. And I think what's really cool is for people listening right now, I know certainly myself, is to ask ourselves, who were those people in our lives that believed in us, that really loved us and respected us or appreciated us with our flaws and imperfections, or in when we were in the mud, so to speak, in the different times in our life. And who can I be that for? Who could I be that light for now, who might need me to see them and to believe in them and to give them a hand right now, because I believe that what we send out is also what we receive. So for those of us that may not have that source of accountability right now, and we desire that, one way is to give that, to be that, and then just to sit back and enjoy as that comes back to us, which inevitably always will.
Yes, absolutely. I have found that out this month more than any other month in my whole life. Yes, for sure. Yeah.
Well, I'm celebrating you along with all of your group members, your fellow colleagues, because your stories, and it's not even just the stories themselves, it's your courage to express those short stories, to help people see the stories in their own lives as you've done for us today, and just to continue to grow and grow and grow, and to love and appreciate our own differences and other people's differences, and to find the beautiful, outrageous part of us, that even if it may be judged right now, to continue to believe in ourselves and not to change, to stay who we are, because it's just a matter of time until others can see that too.
You have such a beautiful way of encapsulating everything that's been said, and your choice of words is so inspiring. Yeah, I think, after retiring as a Vistage chair this month, and it's only one of like 8 things that I do, and everybody asking me what's next. There's so many what's next for me. I keep thinking of sharing story and the power of it. I mean, I already have speaker school and I already have my coaching. I'm looking into starting on my YouTube channel something I call Story Share, where I would share a story every week, and that help people, inspire them. Though I've launched my new Goddess Foundation. I'm going to let go of put out my one-woman show that nobody's ever seen. I have all kinds of things I'm so excited about doing, but I had to let go of something to make room for some of these other things. I'm excited about this next chapter.
I'm excited with you, and I thank you for all that you have already shared with our world and what you are planning to share. How can people learn more about you, about the various programs and trainings that you have, and about the power of storytelling?
Well, you could start at my website and you could email me directly from there, and I always welcome direct contact. And you could click on Speaker School. I'm very excited. My next Speaker School, I told you I just moved to Florida, Naples, Florida, which is just beautiful. And I live in a gorgeous community, and I'm actually running my speaker school January 13th to 15th in my new community. And already people signed up from all over the US and one international, and I'm very excited about that. And on the website, there's tabs. You can go to my coaching or any of the other things that I do besides that. And hopefully by the end of the month, my Goddess Foundation will launch as a connection to seeing my one-woman show. I always had the idea once I launched the foundation, that's how I could tie it to releasing the show. And because the show, my one-woman show, was the story of my life as told through the shoes of my decades of my life, instead of being a pay-per-view, it's going to be a pay-per-shoe. And then people can donate to my new Goddess Foundation, which is to help young women start entrepreneurial businesses. I didn't have that help. I'd like to help women young women do that. So lots of great projects in the work.
Oh, thank you, Mikki. And I believe that you've done that for both men and women today with our conversation. I really do. We need reminders of how incredible we are, of how powerful our own stories are, and how we and others can learn from them. So thank you again for the good work that you're doing in our world.
My pleasure, Vered. And by you launching this wonderful podcast, The Mindset Game, I believe you're doing the very same thing. Good luck with it. And I'm honored to have been a part of it. And keep up your beautiful elocution and choice of words. I find it so inspiring. Have a great day.
Thank you.